Welcome, fellow reality explorers, to another spine-chilling episode where we dive into the eerie world of glitches in the Matrix. Today's stories are unlike anything you've ever heard. They're not just strange occurrences or weird coincidences. These are stories that challenge the very fabric of reality itself. Did these people cross into alternate dimensions? Was the world around them glitching, or was it something far more terrifying? Stay with us as we explore 10 of the most shocking glitches that make us wonder, could we really be living in a simulation? Story 1. The Vanishing House. Our story begins in a quiet suburban neighborhood, a place where everything seemed familiar and stable, at least for David. Growing up on the outskirts of town, David had spent his childhood in a small, humble house. It was the kind of home that holds your memories like a time capsule, his first bike ride, birthdays, family dinners, and the comfort of the front porch where he would watch the sunset with his parents. It was a place that defined his past, a piece of his identity that he could always return to, no matter where life took him. After years of living in a bustling city for work, David had longed to reconnect with his roots. One summer, he decided to make the trip back to the quiet town where he grew up. The idea of visiting his childhood home filled him with nostalgia, and he couldn't wait to relive those old memories. The day he set out, the weather was perfect, the kind of warm, golden afternoon that invited reflection. David drove through the familiar winding streets, his heart racing with excitement as he got closer. It wasn't long before he reached his old neighborhood. He took a deep breath, expecting to see the house just as he remembered it. A cozy two-story home with a small garden, its white picket fence still standing proudly. But when he turned onto his street, something felt off. At first, he thought it was just his imagination. After all, so many years had passed, but as he neared the familiar bend, he couldn't shake the feeling of unease. The house was simply gone. David slowed his car, his eyes scanning the area. The street appeared the same, with its neat rows of houses, but there was a blank space where his home should have been. The lawn was overgrown, but not in the way it had been when he left. It looked abandoned, like no one had tended to it in years, except there was nothing there at all. No house, no yard, not even the remnants of a foundation. Just an empty plot of land, covered in grass and wildflowers. Confused, David parked his car at the curb and stepped out. He walked slowly down the street, checking the house numbers on the other homes to make sure he hadn't made a mistake. Everything looked normal until he reached the spot where his house had once stood. He double-checked the house number, convinced he had to be wrong. But no. This was the place where he had spent his childhood. Yet it was as if it had never existed. A sinking feeling grew in the pit of his stomach. What happened? Thinking it was some kind of mistake, David pulled out his phone and typed the street name into a map app, hoping to confirm the location. But his phone's GPS returned an unexpected result. There was no record of that street anymore. The map displayed a blank space where his home should be, no street name, no marker, nothing. His heart pounded as he refreshed the map, convinced it was a glitch in his phone. But the result stayed the same. Now truly unsettled, David walked over to the neighbors' houses, hoping someone could shed light on what had happened. He knocked on the door of the nearest home, an elderly couple he remembered from his childhood. They answered, but when David asked about the house where he had grown up, the couple gave him a confused look. "We've lived here for decades," the man said, scratching his head. "There was never a house there, son. Never." David's mind began to race. He asked the couple if they remembered anyone who might have lived there before. But they shook their heads, each denying the existence of a house at that spot. Was he losing his mind? He felt the ground shift beneath him, as though reality itself was warping. He spent the next few hours in a haze, trying to make sense of what was happening. He visited the local library, hoping to dig up records or historical maps. But when he searched for the address, there were no records, no deeds, no photos, nothing to suggest that the house had ever existed. It was as if the entire structure had been erased from history. Even local archives showed no trace of his childhood home. David returned to the street again, hoping for an explanation, but there was no new insight. It felt like he had stepped into a different reality, one where his past had been wiped clean. It was as if the house, and all the memories associated with it, had never existed. The eerie feeling settled deeper inside him as he drove away. His mind refused to let go of the unsettling thought. Had he somehow slipped into a parallel universe? Had he crossed a threshold into a version of his hometown where the house had never been built, where his entire past had never happened? As he drove further away from the neighborhood, David's thoughts began to spiral. He tried calling his parents, desperate for some connection to his reality. But when they answered, the conversation was strangely detached, almost as if they were speaking from another dimension. They couldn't remember his visit to the house either, and the conversation ended abruptly. David couldn't shake the feeling that his life, his memories, were no longer his own. He was caught between two versions of the world, one where his childhood home existed, and one where it was erased, gone from the very fabric of reality. As he continued his drive, it felt as though the world itself was subtly shifting, the lines between his memories and the present becoming increasingly blurred. That night, David couldn't sleep. He kept wondering if he was the only one who remembered the house. Was it just a glitch in his mind? Or had he truly crossed into a different dimension, one where his memories no longer matched the world around him? He had always heard of strange glitches in the Matrix, but had never imagined that he would be part of one. To this day, David cannot shake the haunting uncertainty of that day. The house is gone, and the memories of it are fading. He still wonders if he'll ever find his way back to the version of reality where his childhood home exists. But for now, the mystery remains unsolved, a glitch in the Matrix that leaves David questioning whether the world he remembers ever really existed at all. Story 2. The Mirror That Refused to Reflect. Emma had always considered herself a logical person, someone who valued reason and could easily dismiss the mysterious or strange as mere coincidences. But nothing could have prepared her for the unnerving experience she had one quiet morning in her bathroom. It started as just another typical routine, getting ready for work, brushing her hair, and mentally going over the tasks ahead of her. But it quickly escalated into something that would make her question everything she knew about reality. It was a cold, gray morning when Emma stood in front of the bathroom mirror, running a brush through her long brown hair. The mirror, framed in antique brass, had been with her for years and was always a comforting, everyday object. She didn't expect anything out of the ordinary, but that morning, as she glanced at her reflection, she noticed something was wrong. At first, it was subtle, so much so that she thought she had imagined it. But as she continued brushing her hair, she realized something was off. Her reflection wasn't quite matching her movements. Emma blinked. Her reflection blinked, but not at the same time. There was a slight delay, as if it were lagging behind her every motion. Her eyes widened. She raised her hand to adjust the brush, and sure enough, her reflection followed suit, but it wasn't immediate. There was a noticeable pause, like the mirror was trying to catch up to her. A chill ran down her spine, but she brushed it off. Maybe it was just the lighting, after all. She had never really paid attention to the way the light hit the mirror. She was half distracted, focused on the tasks ahead of her. But as the minutes ticked by, the feeling of unease grew. When she smiled at herself, the reflection didn't smile back immediately. It wasn't as if it was delayed for just a split second. It was a few seconds, like the reflection was lagging behind. Emma's smile faded, and the reflection's smile slowly morphed into something that didn't quite match her own. It was an unnatural grin, too wide, almost as though it was mocking her. The kind of smile you might see in a dream where your subconscious is playing tricks on you. Emma's heart began to race, and she leaned in closer to the mirror, her eyes scrutinizing her reflection. She furrowed her brow, thinking maybe it was some trick of the light or a misperception. But when she looked into her eyes in the mirror, she saw something that made her blood run cold. Her reflection was still smiling, but the smile wasn't her own. Her reflection's smile had grown even wider, and it wasn't quite right. The expression wasn't genuine, it was too exaggerated, too fake. It was like the reflection wasn't just mimicking her. It was acting independently, responding to her actions with a slight delay, as if it were trying to take control. Emma stepped back in shock, her hand shaking as she held the brush. The reflection mirrored her actions immediately, as if it were a perfect duplicate. But the unease that had settled in her stomach wouldn't go away. It was as if something in the mirror wasn't her. It wasn't just the reflection itself, it was something deeper, something she couldn't explain. The mirror that had always been a steady part of her daily routine was now a portal into something that felt disturbingly wrong. For a brief moment, she felt like she was staring at someone else, someone that wasn't her. The reflection smiled at her again, but this time it was no longer even close to her real smile. It was wide and stretched, as if the reflection knew something Emma didn't. It was an uncanny, almost sinister expression, a look she didn't recognize in herself. With a jolt, Emma snapped away from the mirror. She stumbled backward, her heart pounding in her chest. The reflection paused for a split second, then returned to its usual synchronized movements. It was as if the moment of distortion never happened. She stared at herself in the mirror for what felt like an eternity, searching for some sign that this was just her imagination running wild. But there was nothing. Her reflection now appeared perfectly normal, as if nothing had transpired. Still shaken, Emma stepped back, her mind racing. Was she dealing with a glitch in the matrix? Was she caught in some kind of time lapse where her reflection wasn't syncing with her? Or was there something far more sinister happening? Was it possible that the reflection had been a glimpse into another version of herself, one that was different, distorted in a way that didn't belong to this reality? For weeks after the encounter, Emma couldn't shake the memory. She became obsessed with the mirror, unsure if she could ever look at it the same way again. Every time she passed by it, she would glance nervously at her reflection, half expecting it to act up again. She even tried to recreate the moment, smiling, blinking, and waiting for her reflection to lag or act out of sync. But nothing ever happened again. The mirror behaved like it always had, reflecting her actions perfectly, almost too perfectly. Emma couldn't explain what had happened that day. Was it a mere glitch in her perception? Or had she actually glimpsed something more, something unsettling about the nature of reality? The whole experience left her with a haunting question. Was the person she saw in the mirror truly herself? Or had she caught a glimpse of someone or something else? Even now, whenever Emma stands before any mirror, a part of her remains unsettled, wondering if the reflection staring back is truly her or a version of her from a different world entirely. Something deep inside her now whispers that the mirror might hold secrets that go beyond mere glass and reflection. Maybe, just maybe, it holds a door to another version of herself, one that is still out there, waiting. Story 3. The Stranger Who Knew My Name. Sarah had always been a creature of habit, sticking to her regular routine. On weekends, she loved visiting the local mall, whether to grab a cup of coffee at her favorite cafe or browse through the aisles of the bookstore that always smelled of paper and freshly brewed tea. It was her Saturday tradition. a break from the monotony of work and everyday life. Nothing unusual had ever happened in those aisles of familiar places. Until one fateful afternoon when a stranger approached her and turned her world upside down. It was a cool, crisp autumn day when Sarah stepped into her favorite bookstore, a little corner shop tucked away in the farthest part of the mall. She'd already spent a good hour scanning through the shelves, lost in the pages of her latest mystery novel, when she decided to take a short break. She stepped toward the cafe section of the store to grab a cappuccino. As she passed through the aisle of bestsellers, a voice cut through the hum of the busy store. "Sarah, it's been a while. How have you been?" The voice sounded too familiar. Sarah froze. She looked around, trying to locate the source of the voice. Her gaze landed on a man standing a few feet away, his friendly smile almost too warm, too welcoming. He was casually dressed. Nothing remarkable about him, except for the fact that she didn't recognize him at all. Her mind raced. How did this man know her name? And why did it feel like he was looking at her as if they were old friends? Her heart skipped a beat. He wasn't a stranger to himself. He acted like they had a history, like they'd shared years of memories. Sarah's instinctive response was to be polite, so she smiled and said, "I'm sorry, do I know you?" The man, however, didn't seem fazed by the question. His expression remained unchanged, almost as if he had expected it. "Of course, we met last year at that charity event. You remember, right? The one where you spoke about your art? I was there," he continued without missing a beat, his voice smooth and assured. But Sarah couldn't place him. She had attended that event, but no one had stood out to her that much. She had spoken about her artwork, yes, but there was no memory of this man at all, no flash of recognition, no emotional connection. Still, the man's presence seemed so confident and so familiar that for a moment, Sarah thought she might be forgetting something important. Perhaps they had met at an event she hadn't fully remembered. But why would he be so certain? Confused, she glanced at him again, searching for any clue that would spark her memory. But there was nothing. There was just this sense of familiarity, mixed with an overwhelming sense of strangeness. How could he know so much about her, yet remain an absolute stranger? Then, to her shock, he added something that made her stomach drop. "You've been feeling anxious lately, haven't you? The stress from work, the pressure from your family. It's been tough." He said it so casually, as though it was the most natural thing in the world to discuss. Her mind raced. How did he know about that? Sarah hadn't told anyone about the mounting pressure at her job or the recent tension with her family. It was something she'd kept to herself, something deeply personal. The information was too specific, too intimate to be a coincidence. For a moment, Sarah just stared at him, unable to speak. Her hands felt cold, and her heartbeat seemed to drum in her ears. Was this a prank? Was this man somehow a part of her life she had forgotten about? She glanced around, wondering if anyone was watching, if this was some sort of hidden camera show. But no one seemed to notice. As she struggled to process this encounter, the man smiled warmly as if nothing was out of the ordinary. "Well, I've got to go now. It was great running into you, Sarah. Take care of yourself, all right?" And before she could even respond, he simply turned and walked away, disappearing between the rows of bookshelves. Her mind was reeling as she stood frozen in place. She couldn't move. couldn't speak. Everything in her told her to follow him, to stop him, and demand answers. But somehow, she couldn't bring herself to do it. The air around her felt thick, like the walls of the bookstore were closing in. She felt as if something inexplicable had just happened, something she couldn't quite comprehend. The more Sarah thought about it, the more unsettled she became. She'd never met this man before. She would have remembered. The details he provided, things only she knew, were far too specific to have been guessed. Was it possible that he had somehow accessed her personal life? Or worse, had she somehow crossed paths with someone from an alternate version of her own reality? A version of herself where she had shared a history with this man. As Sarah left the bookstore, the eerie feeling lingered. She couldn't shake the thought that maybe, just maybe, she had slipped into another dimension, one where her life had taken a different path, where the choices she made were altered, and where this man wasn't a stranger at all. But how could that be possible? She wasn't sure if she had just experienced a strange glitch in reality, or if something far more disturbing was at play. The rest of the day passed in a blur. Every face she passed seemed unfamiliar, even the people she knew. Sarah's thoughts remained consumed by the encounter with the stranger. The way he had looked at her, like he had shared her life, like he had been in the very moments that were most personal to her. But no, he was a complete stranger, right? That night, as she lay in bed, Sarah couldn't help but wonder, had she unknowingly crossed into a parallel world? Had her life somehow intertwined with someone else's reality? The man's words echoed in her mind, and the unease she felt that day grew heavier. Was it all just a bizarre coincidence, or had something far stranger occurred? Something that she could not explain. A moment where reality had splintered, and the stranger knew her name as though they had always known each other. For weeks after, Sarah couldn't stop thinking about the encounter. Every time she entered a crowded place, she half expected to see him again, to hear her name spoken by someone who shouldn't have known it. Would she ever understand what happened? Or was this just one of those unexplainable glitches in the matrix that left us questioning the very nature of our reality? Story 4. The time I woke up in a different city. It was a typical Tuesday morning when Brian woke up, just like any other day. The familiar sounds of his alarm clock buzzing, the rays of sunlight streaming through the curtains, and the soft hum of the city outside his window greeted him as he stretched and rubbed his eyes. The bed was comfortable. The room was just as it always had been. His routine felt normal, predictable. He was in his own home, in his own bed, in his hometown. Or so he thought. As Brian sat up and swung his legs over the side of the bed, he looked out the window. He had always loved this view, the city skyline in the distance, the familiar streets, the same row of cafes and stores lining the blocks. But this morning, something felt off. As he blinked and focused his eyes, it became clear. The city outside his window was not the one he knew. The skyline was different. The buildings were taller in places, shorter in others, and the layout seemed completely rearranged. The streets, which he had walked countless times, now looked unfamiliar. Even the colors of the buildings were off, as though someone had swapped them out for duller, more muted versions. Brian rubbed his eyes, thinking it was just sleepiness making him see things differently. But as he stared again, his sense of confusion deepened. The street corner where he always turned left was gone. replaced by what looked like an old building that never existed before. His heart began to race. He quickly checked his phone to calm his nerves. Surely, this was just some strange optical illusion or a trick of the light. But the GPS still showed him in his hometown, the same familiar address he had lived at for years. The street name was right, the coordinates matched, but everything outside felt completely alien. Confused and unsettled, Brian quickly got dressed, deciding to go out and investigate. Maybe he had just missed something the night before. As he stepped out the door, he expected to find the same sights he had seen thousands of times. But as he walked down the street, it only got worse. The city seemed like a pale imitation of the one he had lived in for years, like a place that was close, but not quite right. The first thing he noticed was the signs. Store names were different. Familiar stores that used to line the streets had been replaced by unfamiliar ones, and some stores he was sure he had seen before were now completely gone. The cafe where he always grabbed his morning coffee was no longer there. In its place stood a completely new business, one he'd never seen before. The street signs were altered too, with strange names that he had never encountered. Brian's footsteps quickened as he tried to navigate the streets, hoping to find something he recognized. But the faces of the people around him seemed off as well. As he walked past strangers, their eyes barely acknowledged him, and when he smiled at a couple of people, they didn't even glance back. It was as if they didn't see him, or worse, didn't know him at all. He stopped a woman to ask for directions, but when he did, she just looked at him with a blank expression and quickly walked away, as though he hadn't spoken at all. It was as if everyone around him was either oblivious or too unfamiliar to engage with him. Brian's stomach churned. Was he imagining this? Had something happened to his mind overnight? He walked for hours, circling the same blocks and familiar areas of his city. But each time, something felt increasingly wrong. The streets weren't where they were supposed to be. The buildings were the wrong height, and the layout made no sense. He kept walking in circles, unable to find the right path back to his apartment. It felt like he was in a maze, one with walls that shifted and changed when he wasn't looking. As night fell, Brian's confusion turned into full-blown panic. He went to a nearby bar, hoping to find someone who could explain what was happening. When he walked inside, the bartender didn't recognize him, and neither did any of the patrons. It was as though he had stepped into a parallel universe, a universe where he wasn't a part of the social fabric, where his very existence seemed to have no bearing. He stayed up late that night, sitting on the couch in his apartment, scrolling through old photos of the city. The memories felt real, and yet they were being overshadowed by the strange reality he now found himself in. The streets he had walked down, the cafes he used to visit, the familiar faces, none of them seemed to exist in this new version of his city. The more he tried to make sense of it, the more distorted everything seemed. It was as if he had slipped into a dimension that was nearly identical to the one he knew, but something subtle was off, something that couldn't be explained. His past, the life he had lived, was slipping further and further away from him. Days passed, and Brian grew more desperate. Every attempt to find something, anything familiar, only deepened his sense of alienation. He visited the park where he used to jog, but it was unrecognizable. No more benches, no familiar landmarks. just an endless stretch of green that made him feel like a stranger in his own home. His apartment looked like it had always been his, but the more he stared at it, the more it seemed like it didn't belong to him at all. Had he truly crossed into a parallel world, or was this just a figment of his imagination? The people in the streets, the stores, the buildings, they all felt like shadows of the life he had known, but nothing was the same. As if someone had taken his reality, mixed it up, and dropped him into a version of the world where his past didn't exist, where his memories weren't shared by anyone else. The world was there, but he wasn't. Brian's questions lingered unanswered. Was this some kind of glitch in the Matrix? A mistake in the fabric of reality that had temporarily pulled him into another dimension? Or had his mind just snapped, and he was trapped in a hallucination of his own creation? No one could offer him answers. He kept trying to return to the city he had once known, but each step he took felt more like a journey to somewhere else, somewhere that didn't belong to him. Months later, he would look back at that time, still unsure of what really happened. He had no idea how he returned to his normal life or whether he ever truly left that alternate city behind. But one thing was certain. That experience haunted him in ways he couldn't explain, a glitch in reality that still left him questioning whether he had somehow crossed over to a parallel world where his past was just a distant memory. And to this day, when Brian finds himself in familiar places, he wonders, is this really where I belong? Or have I simply returned to the wrong version of my reality? Story 5. The strange phone call from myself. Jason had always been a practical person, grounded in the logical realities of everyday life. He was a man who believed in hard facts and solid evidence. He didn't give much thought to the supernatural or unexplained phenomena, and the idea of time travel seemed more like something out of a science fiction novel than a real possibility. But all of that changed one cold, quiet evening, when a phone call turned his world upside down. It started like any other evening. Jason was at home, sitting on the couch with a cup of coffee, scrolling through emails after a long day at work. The apartment was quiet, save for the soft hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of the wall clock. It was the kind of evening where everything felt still, almost serene. He glanced at his phone as it vibrated on the coffee table, expecting to see a text or maybe a call from his friend. Instead, when he picked up the phone, he saw something strange, a number he didn't recognize, but that seemed oddly familiar. Without thinking much of it, Jason answered the call. Hello? At first, there was nothing but a brief moment of static. And then a voice came through, his own voice. It was his voice, but it sounded distant, as though it was coming from far away. Jason froze, the hairs on the back of his neck standing up. The voice on the other end spoke his name clear and calm, as if it had always been meant to be said. Jason, it's me, from the future. The words hit him like a shockwave. He blinked, his mind scrambling to make sense of the impossible. He glanced at the phone screen again, expecting some sort of mistake. But the number was still the same, and the voice was unmistakably his own. The tone of the voice, though, was off. There was an echo, a kind of distortion, like it was coming from another time or place. It was as though the very air around him had shifted, warping the familiar into something bizarre and unsettling. Listen carefully. The voice continued, sounding both urgent and calm. You need to make a decision. or everything will change. You're at a crossroads, Jason. What you choose now will shape the rest of your life. Jason's mind raced. He wanted to speak, to ask how this could be happening, but the voice interrupted him before he could say anything. There's something you don't know, something you've forgotten. It's crucial that you change your path. If you don't, things will spiral out of control. The people you care about will be affected, and you won't even see it coming. You have the power to change it now, but not for long. Don't ignore this warning. Jason felt his pulse quicken. His thoughts were swirling in a whirlpool of confusion and disbelief. He didn't know what to think, but the voice sounded so certain, so real. And then, before he could even gather his thoughts, the voice spoke one final time. I can't explain it all right now, but I trust you. You'll figure it out. Just make the right choice. And then, silence. Jason sat there, staring at the phone in his hand, trying to process what had just happened. It took a few moments before he could even move, his heart pounding in his chest. He looked at the screen again, almost expecting to see a missed call notification or a voicemail. But there was nothing. No call history. No trace of the strange, cryptic message he had just received. It was as though the call had never even happened. In a daze, Jason tried to call back the number that had just contacted him. His finger hovered over the screen, shaking slightly, before he hit the call button. The phone rang once, twice, but then the connection failed. The line went dead. Frustrated, Jason tried again, but this time, the number was disconnected. Jason's mind was a storm of questions. Had he just received a call from the future? A warning from another version of himself? Or had it all been some kind of elaborate prank? But nothing about the conversation made sense in the context of a joke. The tone of the voice, the urgency, and the specific details about his life that only he knew, those were not things anyone could have fabricated. The call felt real, too real. As the evening wore on, Jason found himself unable to focus on anything. He couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed, something deep inside him. The voice had given him advice, yes, but what was it about? What decision was he supposed to make? He had no idea. All he knew was that the conversation had left him feeling as though the world was slightly out of alignment, like he had been given a glimpse into a reality that wasn't quite his own. The next day, Jason found himself second-guessing every decision he made. He couldn't stop thinking about the call. He even began to question his own memories. Had he really made the right choices in life? Were there paths he hadn't taken that might have led to different outcomes? And if so, could he really change his future now based on one cryptic message? The strangest part was that, as time went on, he couldn't shake the feeling that the world around him was slowly becoming unfamiliar, like he had somehow shifted into a version of his life where his past decisions had different consequences. He couldn't point to anything specific, but it was as though small things had subtly altered. People acted differently around him, conversations took odd turns, and even the air in the room seemed to change when he thought about the phone call. Weeks passed, and Jason couldn't shake the gnawing sense that something had happened. Had he crossed a line between dimensions, a line between the life he knew and another parallel existence? Was the phone call truly a warning from the future, or had he inadvertently stumbled into a reality where time itself wasn't as linear as he had always believed? The call haunted him, leaving him with no answers, only more questions. He still couldn't find any evidence that the call had happened, except for his vivid memory of the conversation. Had it been real? Had he simply lost his mind? Or had an alternate version of himself reached across time, trying to change the course of events? And so, Jason lived with the unsettling feeling that he had received a message from a version of himself that existed in a world where time and reality weren't bound by the same rules. Was it possible that he had inadvertently crossed into another timeline where the decisions he made had led him down a different path? Would he ever discover the full truth behind that strange phone call, or would it remain one of life's greatest mysteries, a glitch in the matrix that left him questioning the very nature of time, space, and identity? Only time would tell if he was still on the same path, or if it had already been altered forever. Story 6. The Clock That Ran Backwards. Lena had always been captivated by the passage of time, not just because of how it shaped her life, but because of the objects that marked it. As an avid watch collector, her living room was a sanctuary of antique timepieces, each one with its own story to tell. Among them, an old grandfather clock stood out, a stunning relic passed down through generations, its dark wooden frame and ornate gold details a testament to craftsmanship. The clock had been in her family for as long as she could remember, and its ticking was like a constant companion, a rhythm that grounded her. She couldn't imagine a day without it. One evening, after a long week of work, Lena sank into her couch, ready to unwind. She had just returned from a weekend trip to the countryside and was eager to relax in the comfort of her living room. As she sat back, her gaze naturally shifted to the grandfather clock in the corner. The steady, reassuring tick-tock had always been a sound she cherished, almost like a heartbeat in the room. But tonight, something was different. The hands on the clock, normally precise and unyielding, were moving strangely. At first, Lena thought her eyes were playing tricks on her. The second hand ticked backward. She blinked, trying to make sense of it, but there it was again. The second hand was moving in reverse. A cold shiver ran down her spine as she rubbed her eyes and leaned in closer. The minute hand followed suit, slowly turning counterclockwise. For a moment, Lena wondered if it was a malfunction. Maybe the mechanism was old, or the clock's internal gears had finally given in to age. She stepped forward and tried to adjust the hands, but as soon as she touched the clock's face, the hands continued their backward motion, as though they were resisting her touch, mocking her attempts to control them. She stepped back in confusion. The grandfather clock didn't stop at a mere malfunction. It seemed to defy all logic. As Lena watched, her mind struggling to comprehend what was happening, the hands continued to turn counterclockwise. First minutes, then hours seemed to reverse. She couldn't tear her eyes away as the day unraveled before her. Suddenly, the air around her began to shift. The room felt colder, the shadows longer, as if the world itself was being turned back in time. Lena felt disoriented, like she was no longer in the present, but in some strange, liminal space between the past and the future. It wasn't just the clock that was changing. The environment around her began to shift. She glanced at the clock again. The hands had gone back several hours now, the time inching toward the morning. Had she gone back in time? Was this some kind of dream? As Lena turned to look around the room, she noticed that the objects on her shelves were subtly moving as well. The books she had stacked earlier in the day were now neatly arranged again, exactly where they had been when she first returned from her trip. Her cup of tea, which had been sitting half empty on the table, was now full. The bowl of fruit on the counter had returned to its original position, and the banana she had eaten earlier that afternoon was now back on the counter, as if she had never touched it. Her heart pounded in her chest. Had she just stepped into a time loop? Was she trapped in a version of the past where things had to play out all over again? She moved cautiously around her apartment, barely able to breathe. Even the conversations she'd had earlier in the day began to replay in her mind. She thought about the chat she'd had with her friend Sophie over lunch, about plans they had made for the upcoming weekend. Hadn't she just spoken to Sophie? She pulled out her phone and checked her messages. Her heart skipped a beat. The message she had read earlier that afternoon from Sophie was sitting there in her inbox again, as if it had just arrived. The exact same message, the exact same words. She quickly opened the message and read it once more. "Hey Lena, just wanted to check in. Are we still on for Saturday? Let me know." Lena remembered replying to it before she left, confirming their plans. But now it was as if the conversation had never happened, as if it was happening for the first time. The eerie sensation of déjà vu crept in, and Lena's unease grew. Her mind raced. Could it be that she had slipped into an alternate version of her day? A reality where time had started moving backward? Was she seeing this version of her life as a ghost, observing her past unfold once more? She opened the message again, double-checking the timestamp. It had been sent hours earlier, before the reverse motion of the clock began. Yet now it felt like she was being given the chance to relive those moments all over again. With a shaking hand, Lena tried to make sense of the situation. She stood in front of the clock, staring at it as the minute hand rewound further still. Her thoughts were jumbled. She was no longer sure what was real, what was a memory, and what was a moment she was yet to experience. Was time truly being rewritten, or was it all in her mind? Could this really be a glitch, a moment in time where the world was misaligned, or had she crossed into another reality where things were not as they seemed? Panicked, Lena tried to reset the clock again, but every time she adjusted the hands, they moved backward of their own accord. It was as if the clock and the world around her had become a loop she couldn't escape. Everything was being undone, and with each passing minute, she could feel her grip on reality slipping away. Would everything go back to normal, or would she be trapped in this distorted version of her life forever? With a heavy heart, she left her apartment and stepped into the street outside, hoping for some clarity. But the world outside had changed too. The streets she had known so well were now eerily quiet, and the sounds of the city seemed muffled, like an old record playing out of sync. She checked her watch, and it was as if it too had gone back in time. The hands on her wristwatch were turning backward, mirroring the grandfather clock in her apartment. Time was no longer a constant. It was a fluid thing, warped, twisted, and beyond her control. Lena couldn't tell if she was stuck in a time loop or had somehow slipped into another reality where time itself had become unhinged. And as the hours went by, she grew more and more certain. The life she knew was slipping away, and she was powerless to stop it. Days later, after countless failed attempts to reset the clock or even undo what had happened, Lena couldn't tell if the reality she lived in had been permanently altered. Had time truly been rewound, or was she simply a witness to an event she could never fully understand? The clock never stopped running backward, and as she sat by it one evening watching the hands move further into the past, Lena realized that maybe she was no longer just a part of time. Maybe time was now part of her. Story 7. The déjà vu that wasn't déjà vu. Tom had never been one to entertain the idea of the supernatural or the unexplainable. He was a man of logic and reason, a skeptic who always looked for rational explanations for anything that might seem strange. Paranormal experiences, he believed, were just tricks of the mind, things like déjà vu or feeling as though you had encountered a situation before. But in truth, it was just the brain playing with patterns. He never gave much thought to the idea that reality could bend in ways he couldn't understand. But one evening, sitting alone at his favorite cafe, that very skepticism was about to be challenged in a way that would leave him questioning everything. It was an ordinary day, or so it seemed. Tom had just returned from a meeting, a typical busy afternoon in the city, and he decided to unwind with a coffee at the cafe down the street. He settled into a quiet corner, the familiar murmur of other patrons around him creating a gentle background hum. The smell of freshly ground beans filled the air, a comforting aroma that had always grounded him in moments of solitude. He sipped his coffee, leaning back in his chair and observing the scene before him, enjoying the peaceful respite. But then, something happened that made his heart skip a beat. As Tom looked around the cafe, everything felt familiar, too familiar. At first, it was a subtle feeling, one he brushed off as his mind simply finding comfort in the routine. But then it grew stronger. He noticed the woman sitting at the corner table, sipping her latte. He had never seen her before, but in that moment, it felt as though he had. He even knew what she was going to do next, how she was going to set her cup down and glance out the window. It wasn't just a hunch. It was almost as if he had witnessed this exact moment before. The more he focused, the stranger it became. The conversations around him seemed oddly familiar, as if he had already overheard every word spoken by the people in the cafe. He could even predict what they would say next, as though he had rehearsed the moment in another time. He saw the barista behind the counter, pouring milk into a coffee cup, and he knew exactly how long it would take him to steam it. It was as if the whole world around him was playing out exactly as it had before, with no room for deviation. It wasn't déjà vu. No, this was something else entirely. This was different. This wasn't a recollection of the past, but an undeniable feeling that he was reliving this exact moment for the first time. Tom could feel the hairs on his neck stand up as the weight of the realization hit him. He had lived through this moment before. It wasn't a vague sense of familiarity. It was as if he were replaying an event from a different timeline, one where every detail was already written out. He could sense where the conversations were going. He could predict the movements of the people around him, and even the sound of the espresso machine hissing seemed like it was preordained. It was as though he was watching a script unfold, one he had already memorized. But the kicker was that he was fully aware that this was the first time he was experiencing it. Tom sat up straighter, his coffee cup momentarily forgotten in his hand. How could this be? He wasn't in the middle of some time loop, nor was he caught in a dream. He could feel the solidity of the cafe chair beneath him, the warmth of his cup in his hand, and the cool breeze from the open door. It was real. It was happening right then. But it felt like he had experienced it all before, and he was just waiting for the next step to happen, waiting for the next action to unfold. It was as if the entire cafe, the people, the smells, the sounds, they were all trapped in a loop, playing out precisely the same way as they had in some other version of this moment. The woman at the corner table looked up and smiled, just as he had predicted, and Tom felt a chill run down his spine. Her smile wasn't just any smile, it was the exact same smile he had seen in his mind moments earlier. Even the sound of the door opening, the jingling of the bell, seemed to be timed exactly as he expected it to be. He turned his attention to the barista who was about to call out the name of a customer, and again, Tom knew what he would say when he would say it. Everything was unfolding just as it had in his head, as if his brain was guiding the events, anticipating them, or even remembering them before they happened. This wasn't a déjà vu. This wasn't just a glitch in his memory or a feeling of familiarity. It was as though he had stepped into a different version of his life, one where the moments he was living now were already written down somewhere, already experienced by someone else. It was as though he had crossed into a different dimension for a split second, a parallel reality where everything had already occurred. And then, as quickly as the sensation had arrived, it began to fade. The sense of knowing what would happen next started to slip away. The people around him no longer seemed as familiar, and the sequence of events no longer felt predetermined. It was as if the universe had shifted back into its normal rhythm, and the world was no longer playing by the strange, surreal rules it had moments before. The woman at the corner table stopped smiling. The barista stopped in his tracks, and everything went back to normal, as if nothing had happened at all. Tom stared at his coffee cup, his thoughts a whirlwind. What had just occurred? He looked around the cafe, trying to steady his breathing, but the world felt disjointed now. The certainty he had felt just moments before had evaporated, leaving him with only confusion and unease. The feeling that he had crossed into another version of reality lingered, and he couldn't shake the thought that maybe, just maybe, he had experienced a different timeline, a place where this moment had already happened. Was this a glitch in his mind? Had he slipped into another dimension, another version of himself, even if just for a few minutes? His skepticism, once so firm, was crumbling, replaced by the unsettling sense that the world he knew wasn't as concrete as he had always believed. Tom left the cafe that night, his mind heavy with questions. What had he just experienced? He couldn't explain it. No amount of logic or reasoning could make sense of it. The only thing he was certain of was that something extraordinary had just happened, something that defied everything he had ever known. The feeling stayed with him long after he walked through the door and into the cool night air, and even as he lay in bed, sleep refused to come. Was it a glitch in the Matrix? Or had he briefly crossed into a reality where time wasn't linear, where moments could be relived or re-experienced in ways he couldn't fathom? The question lingered in the silence of his room. Had Tom just stepped out of his life for a moment and into someone else's? Story 8. The Disappearing Friend. Sarah and Emily had been inseparable for years. They met in high school, both with a love for old movies and long conversations that stretched late into the night. Their friendship had blossomed through shared experiences, college graduations, first jobs, road trips, and endless afternoons at their favorite cafe. No matter where life had taken them, Emily had always been there, a constant in Sarah's life. But one day, it all changed. Emily simply vanished. It wasn't a dramatic goodbye, no final farewell or even a warning. It was just an absence. It began innocently enough. Sarah couldn't get a hold of Emily for a few days. She figured maybe Emily had gotten caught up with work or life. But as the days turned into weeks, Sarah grew more concerned. She tried calling her, texting, even reaching out on social media, but nothing. Emily's phone went straight to voicemail. Her social media accounts went silent, and no one seemed to know where she was. Worried, Sarah turned to their mutual friends, hoping for some insight, but every single one of them was as baffled as she was. They all swore they had never heard of Emily. Had Emily ever existed at all? They couldn't recall a single conversation with Sarah about her, nor could they recall meeting her. It was as if Sarah was speaking about a stranger. Perplexed, Sarah tried to retrace her steps. She dug through her phone, scrolling through messages, photographs, anything that might give her a clue. She found dozens of photos of her and Emily together, vacation photos, birthday pictures, selfies. But each photo now felt alien to her, as if they didn't belong in her life. The memories of their time together, the countless nights spent laughing and confiding in one another, now seemed more like a story she had read in a book. Had they even happened? Sarah's mind was racing. She couldn't shake the feeling that she had been a part of a life where Emily had existed, but now it felt like she had been living in a version of reality where Emily was a phantom, a person who had never truly existed. The strangest part came when Sarah decided to visit their old favorite cafe, the place where they had spent so many afternoons talking about their dreams and making plans for the future. The cafe was a small, cozy spot, tucked in a quiet corner of the city, with mismatched chairs and vintage posters decorating the walls. It had always felt like home to them both. But when Sarah walked in that day, something felt off. The waitress, a young woman Sarah vaguely recognized from previous visits, smiled at her as she sat down. But when Sarah asked about Emily, the woman's expression faltered. "Emily?" she asked, her brow furrowing. "I don't know who that is. I've worked here for over a year, and I don't remember anyone by that name." "Are you sure you're thinking of the right place?" Sarah was taken aback. Had she walked into the wrong cafe? No, this was the same cafe, the same worn wooden tables, the same mismatched chairs, the same scent of fresh coffee in the air. Everything was exactly as she remembered it, except for the fact that the waitress didn't recognize her, and more disturbingly, didn't remember Emily either. For a moment, Sarah felt like the ground had been pulled out from under her. It was as if she had stepped into a parallel world, one where Emily didn't exist, and maybe never had. She felt like an intruder in her own life, as if the memories she clung to so tightly had been erased from everyone else's reality. Sarah tried to keep it together as she sipped her coffee, but the weight of what was happening was crushing her. Was Emily a figment of her imagination? Had her mind fabricated an entire person, an entire history of memories, to fill some void? The thought was terrifying. She had shared so much with Emily. How could she possibly have imagined all of it? As the days passed, Sarah's search for answers became an obsession. She went to the places where she and Emily had spent countless hours, parks, bookstores, even old apartment complexes they had lived in. Everywhere she went, she felt like she was a visitor in a place she didn't belong. People didn't recognize her, and the places she had once known felt unfamiliar. She went back to their old apartment complex, hoping to find something, anything, that could give her a clue. The building was the same, the old doorways and cracked paint still there. But when she asked the landlord about Emily, the answer was chilling. "I don't know any Emily. You're the first person I've heard of living in that unit with someone else."